Game designer Julian Gollop had worked with publisher Microprose through the development and release of 3 titles in the XCOM series. Though all 3 games were successes, the working relationship between Microprose and Mythos Games, Gollop's development team, had become positively toxic. In 1997, after the completion of XCOM Apocalypse, Gollop left Microprose for greener pastures with Virgin Interactive. To make his departure final, he left the rights to the franchise he created with the publisher to do with as it pleased. And as Gollop walked out the door, Microprose already had 2 more XCOM projects in the works by 2 different development teams. But despite the company's apparent commitment to the brand, the publisher had its own share of mounting problems that proved more threatening than an alien invasion. During the original XCOM's final phases of development in late 1993, Microprose was experiencing some major financial problems. To keep the company afloat, Microprose co-founder Bill Steely sought help from his friend Gilman Louie, president of publisher Spectrum Holobyte. That help came in the form of acquisition, as Spectrum Holobyte purchased Microprose that year, leading to Steely's departure soon after in 1994. The company's other co-founder, Civilization creator Sid Meier, exited the company himself in 1996. But Spectrum Holobyte's bailout would prove to be a temporary fix, leading to a takeover bid by GT Interactive, which failed. Microprose's stock fell to new lows and caused speculation about the company's future. Meanwhile, a new XCOM title was getting ready to take flight. XCOM Interceptor was the brainchild of Dave Ellis, a former QA tester at the company who had written strategy guides and other content for earlier games in the series before being made a game designer in 1995. Ellis was a huge fan of the series, and when he got a chance to make games of his own, he saw the potential for the franchise's expansion. To Ellis, XCOM should be as rich a property for Microprose as Star Wars had been for LucasArts. To test his idea, he pitched a project that he hoped would kick off his vision to massively extend the brand. A space combat simulator that had more in common with X-Wing than XCOM. Once it got the green light from his bosses, the work began for Ellis and his Chapel Hill-based team, culminating in the game's May 1998 release. Published by Atari, it was undoubtedly the departure from the tried-and-true formula of squad-based strategy that Ellis had planned. Whether or not it turned out the way he envisioned is another story. Players were placed in the cockpit of an interceptor space fighter and tasked with defending human colonies in star systems far from Earth, all set during the time between Terror from the Deep and Apocalypse. Though it took a backseat to the space combat, strategy played an important role in winning the game, since resources had to be efficiently managed by players. But despite Ellis's intention to use Interceptor as a jumping-off point for XCOM's transformation into a gaming powerhouse, the result left fans of the series somewhat cold. Reviews were decent, but critics found fault with the dramatic shift in gameplay as well as the astronomically hard difficulty. Looking back in an interview with The Last Outpost a few years later, Ellis admitted that both criticisms were well-founded. Apparently, the development team was hamstrung by the 18-month development time, not to mention relatively scarce resources. Interceptor boasted a 14-member team and a budget of about $1 million. When compared to other games in the space combat genre, projects like Wing Commander that often commanded budgets of over $10 million and development teams more than double the size, Interceptor never really stood a chance. By Ellis's account, Interceptor's sales failed to live up to the numbers racked up by its series predecessors, moving only about 30,000 units when all was said and done. The poor sales couldn't have been much of a salve to the cash-strapped Microprose. Only a few months before Interceptor's May release, the assets held by the game's publisher, Atari, had been purchased by Hasbro Interactive. A subsidiary of the toy company behind properties like Monopoly, Transformers, and G.I. Joe, Hasbro Interactive had been on a spending spree since its formation in 1995, acquiring smaller companies to quickly gain a foothold in the video game industry. The division brought in huge amounts of revenue for its parent company. In 1997, its revenues increased by 145%. And by 1998, its revenues grew by another 127%. In September of that year, the good times continued to roll when Hasbro Interactive purchased Microprose outright for $70 million. That purchase included the in-progress XCOM Alliance, a project that had been in development at Microprose's UK studio for years. Like Interceptor, Alliance was planned as another twist on the strategy-heavy gameplay of the original XCOM. This time around, however, gamers would fight aliens in a first-person shooter, with strategy appearing in the form of squad management. But in early 1999, the game was on the verge of cancellation by the company's new corporate bosses. When the floundering project was presented to Microprose's Chapel Hill studio, its development moved to North Carolina from the UK that April. With what seemed like a renewed focus and commitment to the XCOM brand, Ellis and the Chapel Hill team embarked on yet another installment in the franchise. Soon after Interceptor shipped, work on XCOM Genesis began. The game was going to bring the series back to its roots, offering up squad-based strategies set after the events of Apocalypse. Strangely, Hasbro released a budget-priced XCOM title that was meant to be played via email in September of 1999. XCOM First Alien Invasion was loosely based on the first game in the series, but Ellis, regarded by the company as the XCOM guru, apparently had nothing to do with the game's creation or release. Ellis's lack of involvement now seems like a sign of what was yet to come. Hasbro Interactive's massive growth of only the year before had shriveled from 127% to a mere 20%. The higher-ups at Hasbro started keeping a closer eye on the video game division, and with increased scrutiny came cuts. In December 1999, management from Hasbro came to the Chapel Hill studio to tell the assembled developers that they were getting shut down. Genesis was axed. By January of 2000, the studio was closed, with Ellis and many of his colleagues setting up shop across town as a new developer, Vicious Cycle Software. Soon after, Hasbro Interactive began to collapse under the weight of its unsustainable expansion and relative inexperience in the industry. In January of that year, work on Alliance had been relocated to another Microprose studio in Hunt Valley, Maryland. But in late 2000, the new development team was ordered to put Alliance on hold to quickly put together a completely different project in the franchise, a third-person shooter, XCOM Enforcer, set during the events of the first game. With progress on Alliance stalled yet again and a rushed shooter being prepped for release, Hasbro washed its hands of the whole ordeal, selling its video game division to French publisher Infogrames at the end of the year. In April 2001, Enforcer was released by Infogrames to mixed and mediocre reviews. And after Enforcer's completion, work on Alliance seemed to fizzle completely. In February 2002, a website for Alliance went live about 2 days before it was pulled. According to a spokesperson for the publisher, the website's sudden appearance had been, quote, some kind of accident. Alliance was never finished, the project having been canceled without any formal announcement. Though the XCOM franchise had started out as a huge success, each subsequent release moved further and further away from the game that started the franchise. Eventually, the series ended with a second-rate shooter, 2 canceled projects, and a creator who'd walked away from a series that wound up as more trouble than it was worth. It looked like the end of the road for XCOM, but looks can be deceiving. Tune in next time to see XCOM get a second take.
Bienvenidos, it's Gaming Latino, your queer.
AI Galera Bem-vindos de Alga Brasil!
E aí galera, bem-vindos ao Machinima Brasil.
Bienvenidos a Machinima Latino!